Okay, so we talked about vices, we talked a little bit about lights, and now I think we're going to spend a little bit of time going over the basic tools when it comes to starting out and tying flies. And I said this in the last video, the big thing, it can get overwhelming. There's so many different manufacturers and styles of tools and equipment. I try to think on a budget. There's things you need, there's things you want, right? And the things that I'm going to go over tonight are the basic tools that hopefully will get you in the game, and you can kind of expand and go from there. I always use the analogy, think of a carpenter. I'm a rough cut carpenter. I'm not good at woodwork. But when it comes to woodworking, there's basic tools when you start out, and as you progress and you get further into it, you're going to find that there's more advanced tools and equipment. No different than this. So we're going to keep it basic tonight, go through these things, and hopefully, again, this answers some questions. So the first thing I like to talk about are the scissors. And I've got 3 pairs of scissors that I'm going to talk about and go over. And every manufacturer out there has something very similar. I run a lot of stuff from Dr. Slick, and the other company that I work a lot of their tools are from Stonfo, and those have been phenomenal tools as well. So those are the 2 that I typically work with. Again, you have to go out and put your hands on all this stuff and see what's best for you. But when looking at scissors, so I've got, like I said, 3 pairs that I'm going to talk about tonight. Number 1, I have a large pair of scissors that I typically use more so when I'm cutting larger material, coarser material. If I'm dealing with foam, if I'm dealing with deer hair, anything that requires, a little bit more power, if you will, I go to the bigger set of scissors. That just allows me to get a bigger bite and cut through a lot of material relatively easy. You'll notice on all these scissors, the other thing that you may want to pay attention to is when you're buying things, everybody's hand size is different, right? So if you have a set of scissors that are a lot smaller opening, it may be very difficult to even get your hands in there. So that's where going to a fly shop and demoing or putting your hands on this stuff is beneficial sometimes versus just buying stuff online. So that having a large pair of scissors is very important when dealing with those heavier materials or thicker materials. Next, you'll see that I have a pair of more fine point scissors, and this just allows me, that detail of getting into those small nooks and crannies when we're dealing with, 14, 16, 18 and smaller flies. That needle nose point on those scissors is just going to give me the opportunity to get in there a little bit easier. Now understand that when you buy this stuff, a lot of these are going to range or cost you anywhere from $20 to $30 based on what you're getting in the manufacturer. So you want to spend some money and have a quality set of scissors. What you don't want to do is when you start tying, at some point you're going to find that there's certain synthetic materials, whether it's wire, tinsel, anything like that, that could very easily dull these. You don't want to be cutting that material with this. So what I typically will tell folks, recommend, go to Walmart. Nail clippers, and typically where you can find these, you can find these. This is nothing more than like a $2 to $3 cheap pair of scissors. So when I'm cutting any type of wire material, anything that could potentially ding or dull my $20 to $30 pair of scissors, if these things fall apart, so what? Throw them out, buy a new pair. Versus having to go out and spend big dollars on a new pair of scissors. I've started to use these. I've used these for a while now. And again, nothing more than a pair of nail clippers. And these things work phenomenal. trying to get in and get into some tight spaces and cut wire or even tinsel, these are starting to become my go-to over these. So cheap money, they'll certainly save your other tools in the long run. So if you have the opportunity and you're in the market, I would certainly splurge and spend a couple bucks on that stuff. The next thing that you will need would be some sort of bobbin. So when you go out and purchase a bobbin, a lot of times I see this in a kit. When you buy a kit, they typically sell you some sort of bobbin that is relatively short. Now for me, I've got a little bit bigger hand. I prefer a bobbin. This is a 4-inch bobbin. It's a little bit longer, okay? And what you really want to pay attention to is how and where you hold it. At least that's my opinion. So I watch folks, whether it's a long or short bobbin, they'll grab it and they hold right at the tip of the tool. Well, when they start working and tying, their hand is in the way and they can't really even see what they're doing. So number one, if you can move your hand back, that's certainly going to give you a little bit better view in real estate, as far as what you're doing on the vise. But having that larger bobbin, once again, kind of forces me to keep my hands down and away, and I let the tool do the work, and I have better visibility when working, tying those flies on the hook. So I prefer, again, something a little bit longer. If you have shorter bobbins and you decide to upgrade to something a little bit bigger, don't get rid of the short ones. You can use those for whether it's lead-free wire, copper wire, whatever you're working with. That's typically what I use, so it limits the amount of waste. I'm not trying to guess on the length of wire. It comes off the spool, goes on the fly, and very minimal stuff that gets thrown away. So again, if you have a shorter bobbin, don't get rid of them. Some bobbins, and again, this is a video that we're going to try to keep super simple tonight, but there are bobbins out there that have dials on the side. Think of a drag system on your reel. The tighter you crank down on the drag, the harder it is for the line to leave the reel. The tighter you crank down on the bobbin or on the wheel here, it's going to make it very difficult for that thread to leave the tool. So that dial, if you will, or that wheel, whatever you may have, just allows you to dial in the tension or the amount of tension so you have nice tight wraps, but hopefully you're not breaking your thread. That leads me to the next thing. When you're talking about these bobbins, if you can look at the two of these at the tip here, this one is an older bobbin, still usable, but it's nothing more than metal. Whereas the newer bobbins have typically a ceramic tube or a plastic tube. And when you're tying, a lot of times the older ones will develop a burr, or it may just be sharp. So as you start to wrap, one, it might be the amount of tension you're applying on the thread, but two, there may be a defect or a sharp section of that tool that is breaking your thread. So take a look at those things, and if you're constantly breaking thread, that may be the culprit. The ceramic tips or plastic tips on these tools just allow a little bit more protection, if you will. One thing that I have found with some of these, not all of them, it can be a challenge sometimes based on the style. Some of these have, again, the plastic or ceramic tube, and some have just the little inserts at the top and bottom of the bobbin. Why is that an issue? Well, when we get into bobbin threaders. So obviously, in order to get the thread up through this tool, okay, this one works relatively smooth. I can bring that down through, get my thread all lined up. no problem. What I have found with some of these bobbins is when I work with this style, bobbin threader, it gets hung up, and it's a little bit more of a challenge to get down through. So I kind of have to twist and force the tool down through the chamber in order to come out the other end. Stonfo and some other manufacturers, okay, make a bobbin threader where it's essentially a long needle, and at the end of it there's a hook. Okay, that allows with ease to come all the way down through, hook into my thread, pull it out, and that has kind of been the go-to for me. I prefer this style over this, but again, that's just what I do. So those are some little things to look at and to think about. If you are going this route, if you're going to buy a bobbin threader, consider the style or length of the tube, because some of these are relatively short. If you go to put that down through the tube, and this is short and this is long, this might not even come down all the way through, and you're not able to get your thread through the bobbin threader and up through the tip of the tool. So again, little things, the little details add up over time, and hopefully that kind of helps and saves on some frustrations there. The next thing I like to talk about, this is again nothing more than you can find these at a hardware store, arts and crafts store, needle nose pliers. So these pliers, there's no groove in the jaw. These are relatively flat, and I like that because it just kind of prevents some wear and tear on the hook. And then where I'm going with that is a lot of the hooks that I buy today are barbless, but there are hooks that we still tie with that have a barb, and I pinch everything. Or if you go out and you're fishing local waters that their rules and regs, maybe certain times of the season require barbless or pinched barb, these seem to be a little bit more user-friendly with hooks. Little tip, if you're tying flies and you're pinching the barb, pinch the barb on your hook before you tie your fly. Nothing is worse than to go through all that work and effort, use all that material to then pinch the barb and find out you break the hook point. Now you got to throw it all away and start all over. So I typically will pinch things first, and if it breaks, big deal. We throw the hook away and we start with a new one. So a pair of needle nose pliers works really well at the desk. I carry these in my bag too, but it certainly makes things a little bit easier versus some folks will even use the jar or the vise. I prefer not to do that, just putting less wear and tear on the tools or the vise itself. But again, that's just me. The next thing that I will go over would be hackle pliers. So a couple basic sets of tools here. Both of these are hackle pliers. One, being this one, will rotate. So a lot of times if we're working on a post, we'll say like a parachute Adams, we'll say, this just gives me a little bit more range of motion. They rotate 360 degrees. They spin around. So it's a little bit easier to operate and work with materials when you're running around posts with those. Another set of pliers. This is a very basic set of hackle pliers. But what you'll notice is this has a rubber boot on it. A lot of them come this way, but a lot of them don't. And where I'm going with that is if it doesn't have some sort of rubber on it, what's going to happen is when you grab a lot of these materials, these feathers, right, they're typically very brittle. They're small. And if you have metal on metal, you run more of a risk of either slipping, so the material comes out and your feather unwinds, or you run the risk of cutting through the material, and once again you're going to get the same results. Everything's going to unravel on you. So if you're going to buy a pair of hackle pliers, I recommend at least looking for something that's got that rubber boot on it. That will certainly help you as you go.